Greenland is quite an interesting country, for many different reasons, but perhaps the most interesting is the fact that it's a partially autonomous economy, while still being part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And that means a few things, although most notably it means that Greenland isn't completely independent from Denmark, which is actually something the Greenlanders wish to be. But the problem is that Greenland is economically dependent on Denmark to survive. The reason for this is that 50% of Greenland's GDP currently consists of what is called a bloktilskud, which is basically the same as social welfare, just for an entire country instead of an individual. So if Greenland wishes to become independent, they need to somehow generate twice as much money as they currently do, which is not an easy task. But Greenland has some options, and those options are what makes Greenland so valuable, both in geopolitics as well as international economics. In fact, Greenland could become so influential that a large part of today's economy could become dependent on it. Furthermore, these options are what made the Trump administration put out an offer to buy Greenland from Denmark. Although the thing is, Denmark is well aware of Greenland's importance and will therefore hold on to Greenland for dear life, at least until they are able to sustain themselves economically and end up requiring independence from Denmark. But they will have to make some interesting but devastating sacrifices to accomplish this. So let's find out what these options are, and whether or not Greenland is ready to accept the sacrifices that come along with them, by first exploring the land of Greenland, or more specifically what lies beneath this land. And to do that, we need to first take a look at this very specific point of interest. It's called Kvanefjellet. And here they recently discovered an abundance of rare earth elements. This is important because there's not many places on Earth where these can be found. In fact, one country sits on roughly 70% of the world's total supply of rare earth elements, and that country is China. Now, that's a problem because there's an increasing demand for these elements, since there are many use cases for them. An example is the device you are watching this video on right now, as it most likely contains multiple rare earth elements in the battery, magnets, and so on. So it's easy to see why there's an immense international interest in extracting Greenland's recently discovered rare earth elements, as it effectively could end the Chinese monopoly on the elements. But there are a few rather concerning obstacles standing in the way of this actually happening. You see, the only reason we know there's rare earth elements underneath Kvanefjellet is because a private company spent a lot of money researching it. That company is Greenland Minerals Limited. Now, this might sound like nothing more than a kind gesture from a Greenland-based mining company, but that's simply not the case. By allowing this company to research Kvanefjellet, this company required monopoly on the extraction of any resources found there, which means that it wouldn't be Greenland who would benefit from this. Instead, it would be Greenland Minerals Limited. And while that might sound like a terrible deal for Greenland from an economical perspective, it's an even worse deal from an environmental perspective. And here I'm not talking about some silly CO2 emissions or the destruction of their beautiful landscape. No, I'm talking about something much worse. Radioactive waste. You see, Greenland Minerals found that if they were to mine for rare earth elements, it would be unavoidable that uranium, a highly radioactive element, would be extracted as well. Now, this wouldn't be that big of a deal in a completely rural area where there would be no people to harm. But the thing is, Kvanefjellet is located just north of Narsak, a city home to around 1,400 people. This means that if mining operations were to begin here, the inhabitants of Narsak would be very likely to inhale the uranium, as it wouldn't take much more than a gust of wind to carry the uranium particles into the city and eventually the lungs of the people. So not only would Greenland not receive their fair share of profits from this mining endeavor, its people would also become radioactive. And I don't think you need a degree to see that this doesn't sound like a particularly great deal, not from an economical perspective and not from a health perspective. But it gets worse, as there's still one more thing I haven't told you yet about this company, and that is the people who own it. you're probably under the impression that it's most likely some rich dude from Greenland who owns this company. And if the name of the company is anything to go by, it sounds like a pretty good guess. But the fact is, reality couldn't be further from that. Greenland Minerals Limited is actually an Australian-based company. But the most concerning thing is the largest shareholder is a Chinese-based holding company called Shenghe Resources Holding. They acquired a 12.5% stake in the company in 2016, as Greenland Minerals was looking for a place to process these elements, which is a technically challenging step that is key to the project's viability. So obviously Greenland Minerals ended up with a company placed in the country that already has a monopoly on rare earth elements, China. Which is the exact opposite of what was supposed to happen. And let me just remind you how important these elements are. Without them, we wouldn't be able to make cell phones, fighter jets, magnets, electric motors, batteries, and so on. So it's in our best interest to have a diversified supply of these elements from a number of countries, which, as you may remember, isn't the case today, as they are very rare. So if China gets its hands on Greenland's rare earth elements, which they would if Greenland approved the mining of Kvanefjellet, China would essentially produce and refine almost 100% of the Earth's total yearly supply of rare earth elements, which would obviously be a pretty bad thing. But interestingly, Shenghe Resources Holding has since 2016 decreased its share in the company to just 9%, which might sound odd, considering that is the exact opposite of what you'd expect from someone with a monopolistic view, like China. But there's actually a very simple reason for this recent reduction in ownership.
Vi stopper Kvanefjeldsprojektet, så det bliver ikke til noget. Man skal lytte til folket, og folket har talt. Så det bliver ikke til noget. Det bliver ikke til noget.
So what now? It's clear that, at least for now, we won't see any rare earth mining operations in Narsaq, meaning that Greenland's economic dependence on Denmark will remain if they don't find something else. But maybe they do have some other options. And the thing is, Greenland is huge. It's the 12th largest country on Earth. It's the largest island in the world. It's bigger than Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and almost as big as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, meaning there's bound to be other natural resources here. And well, there is, most notably oil, but it's unlikely that it will ever get extracted, for the simple reason that it would be too expensive to do so. You see, there's a high chance that the vast majority of Greenland's oil reserves lie in the Greenland Sea around the Arctic Circle, which makes it incredibly difficult and therefore expensive to extract, rendering it practically useless when considering the oil prices of today. Not to mention the fact that the world is slowly transitioning away from fossil fuels. So oil is probably not the answer either. But Greenland is also expected to have vast deposits of iron ore, although as it currently stands today, most of that iron is buried beneath a thick layer of ice and snow, making it inaccessible, at least until the ice melts, which it eventually will. But that means this is more of a long-term solution. So maybe they should take a completely different approach and try and emulate the success that Iceland has had with crypto mining facilities. You see, both nations have a distinct advantage when it comes to crypto mining due to their climate, as they are both exceptionally cold, which is very important in crypto mining because these massive crypto farms run on computers that get really hot. So cooling is therefore needed to keep the computers from melting, making Iceland as well as Greenland perfect destinations to put crypto mines. But even though it is an interesting way of generating money, it's unlikely that Greenland could earn enough money from this endeavor to become financially independent from Denmark, considering they need a few $1 billion annually, leaving Greenland with only two options: raise taxes or reduce spending, which are both very unlikely to happen, for reasons I don't think I need to explain. So does that mean Greenland will rely on Denmark for many years to come? Well, I guess they've run out of options, unless of course they change their mind on rare earth elements, or find other creative ways to generate revenue. But one thing is for sure: until that day comes, Greenland will remain extremely valuable to Denmark,